All right, so I'm going to give you a very quick crash course in a bit of behavioural science. And then we talk about labour markets and why it's relevant. And then also I'm going to suggest how maybe we could make it even better, this sort of domain. All right, I should say one of the things, we've always had a bit of an eye on Glassdoor for various reasons. And it's the kind of thing where actually if Glassdoor hadn't done it, we would have think, oh, someone needs to create a Glassdoor. So I think that should be, well, we certainly see that as a kind of compliment. All right, let's get going. So what's the kind of basic idea, for those who don't know anything about it? This is the team. I won't go into a lot of detail, but it was set up in 2010 by the coalition government inside Downing Street, and we work with various figures from across the world. This actually is, standing next to me is Richard Thaler, who won last year's Nobel Prize, there you are, ka-ching, for his work on behavioural economics. So the basic idea is not complicated. It's that a lot of the decisions which we make in governments or businesses or organizations are sort of premised on a notion of what makes human beings do what they do. If you open an economics textbook, it's basically that you're utility maximizers, so you weigh the pros and cons of things in a super rational way, and then you work out what to do. It's a nice idea, it's just not true for the most part. So that's not, how do we get in this situation where you think, oh God, I really want to lose some weight, and then someone puts some cake in front of you, and it's like, oh, it doesn't work out that way, or you want to exercise more, or etc. And indeed, it's not just small examples, but it's lots of them. So if we just dive in for a second, here's a very simple illustration of how actual human beings think about the world. Have you seen this? It's quite a fairly well-known illusion, but if I ask you, look at that, what colour is that to you? Brown, very good. And that one is? Right. Okay, very good. But so let's just fade out the background and compare them. So we're going to just white out the background and set them side by side. There we go. So honestly, that is how it is, you see. So this, by the way, is what's called a colour constancy illusion. So your brain isn't actually necessarily interested in what exactly how the world is. You're making certain kinds of guesses and jumps and leaps. This is what lies behind, by the way, remember that whole thing about that dress? Breaking marriages across Britain and the world, in fact. People argue, because people literally will see in different colours, because it's just on the edge of one of these colour constancy effects. Because your brain's not really interested in exactly what is the frequency of this thing. It's making a best guess as to what colour it probably would be in shadow and so on, right? So your brain is doing this all the time. It's making sort of guesses about what's going on in the world, and some things it's not interested in. So it's not interested in the actual frequency. It's just thinking, if this was in similar light, what would it probably be? Okay? So a lot of behavioural science basically is built on trying to understand the actual mental shortcuts that people use to make decisions about what they do. It's not just trivial stuff about what you see and what colour you think a dress is, but also big decisions in life. I'll just show you one. It's a very famous example, amongst policy wonks, in Britain, where from the late 1950s, the suicide rate dropped. And you can see quite dramatically, it dropped sort of year after year after year for both men and women from the late 1950s into the 1960s. And so a lot of discussion about why was it? Was it free love? We're all getting nicer to each other, etc. In fact, it has a very well-known explanation. Some of you might know what it is. Know this particular phenomenon? It's North Sea oil. North Sea oil drops our suicide rate. Like, what? Well, the reason is because one of the ways that people would kill themselves, certainly in the 1940s and 50s, is you turn on the oven, your gas oven, and you stick your head in the oven, right? Which people still occasionally talk about. By the way, it's not effective anymore. But why isn't it? Is because it used to work, because the gas was derived from coal. It had a lot of carbon monoxide in it. So when you put your head in the oven, I realize this is a bit odd for a minute, but it would, that's what killed you. Whereas what happens from the late 1950s, North Sea oil comes along and so-called natural gas doesn't have much carbon monoxide. So you don't know it, but now you put head in the oven, you feel a bit queasy, but it won't kill you. So this is the most important decision you could make in your life, whether to end it, turns out is affected by quite straightforward behavioural factors. And if we break down suicides for the UK into other causes, you can see this is suicides from carbon monoxide poisoning, see, and then this is every other form of suicide. So particularly men, by the way. So you can see men are obviously incredibly lazy. My life is so bad, I'm going to end it. It turns out, head in the oven, a bit awkward. Oh, well, I'll carry on then. And there's almost no substitution at all. So if that's how real human beings are, I mean, actually it's kind of a sad example, but it tells you something about we use these mental shortcuts to make decisions, and then if we hit a bit of friction, it's incredibly consequential. So if that's true for suicide, it's certainly going to be true for, hey, where shall I go and work for? Actually, all kinds of things. Who am I going to marry next? Like, all kinds of questions turn out to be affected by the same mental shortcuts with real human beings. Okay, so now what's that got to do with labour market? So let's launch into it. I should explain one thing is behavioural scientists are very interested in well-being, because one question is, if this is true, is this actually quite worrying, if you think about it in a funny kind of way, is do we know what makes us happy? Actually, Nick, who'll be talking later, will also done lots of work in this area too. So if I ask you, who's been on a holiday in the last sort of 3 to 6 months? I'm quite sure if you so where did you go to?
Southeast Asia.
And was it great?
Amazing.
Who else? You somebody? Yeah. You went to Italy?
Italy, yeah.
Italy, and how was that?
It was lovely.
It was lovely, lovely. Very good. But was it? So, here's one of the things is found, is that actually people are rubbish at remembering how good their holiday was. Right? It's true for lots of things. So what often happens is that if you get someone to keep a diary and keep track of how happy and how good it was, actually it's raining and there's a problem with the hotel and blah, blah, you're arguing with your partner, and then you come back home and say, how was your holiday? Particularly, oh, it was great. It was fantastic. Now, hopefully yours really was, but we know that there are very strong systematic biases, so you misremember. So you tend to remember just what happened at the end, and you remember peak experiences and so on and so on. And in general, we tend to misremember. Actually, it's a nice thing to make things better than they were, actually. So why does that matter? Because maybe our brain is actually misleading us even about how good is something. That's rather worrying, because if we misremember, it also turns out we then mispredict. Right? And then we go and do the same holiday and go like, oh my God, why did I do this? I hated this place. Okay, so what about labour market? So one of the things we actually did with David Cameron was very interested in was around well-being too, and we started measuring in a very large scale in Britain, and indeed other countries have been doing it now, life satisfaction. We asked people, are you satisfied with your life, and are you happy, and are you anxious, and so on and so on, and do you think the things you're doing are worthwhile? So we have massive amounts of data on this. And this was a simple breakdown by just job type for the UK. So there's your salary, how much you're earning in these different occupations, and this is your life satisfaction. Fortunately, there's some relationship between the two, but it's surprisingly not that strong. Anyway, but what's interesting is to look at the distribution. It did attract a bit of press attention. So, like, who are the clergy? Now, that might not be for everyone, I realise that, and there's some kind of compounding effects going on here, but the guys who work in the church, they don't get very well paid, but they do seem weirdly happy. But farmers are happy, and agriculture and so on. Fitness instructors are doing pretty well there. Look at that. Don't get very well paid. School crossing patrol. Have you ever thought about, what to do next? Not very well paid, but pretty happy. And so on. Or over here, look, legal professions get really pretty well paid, but medics are less well paid generally, but are a bit happier. This is life satisfaction, not work satisfaction, by the way. And let's look at some of these other ones down here. Telephone sales, not that much fun normally. Publicans, look at that one. Everybody thinks it'd be really cool to run a pub. It's quite nice to go to a pub, but it turns out it's really rubbish in terms of life satisfaction. So why is this interesting? So this is a class of problem, sometimes economists, let alone behavioural economists, called a de-shrouding issue. Actually, John in his introductory remarks had a great phrase. He said, it's tough to make an informed decision. Like it really is, right? And we have a name for it, it's called a shrouding problem. So you can't see some attribute of something, so when we use a mental shortcut, we'll use something else. And this is true in lots and lots of domains. And it's certainly likely to be true for work. So you can probably find out how much you'll earn, but what a surprise, it's quite hard to find out what will be the impact on your life satisfaction. And indeed, it's likely to be subject to some of the same kind of biases. So a classic one will be, you're in a small work environment and you're like, it's okay, it's fun. And then you get a job offer from a big company like Rolls-Royce or something, who knows. And you think, oh, that'd be really great. And one of the reasons you'll probably think it's great is because your peers you work with are going to be really impressed, okay? So you then go to work at Rolls-Royce and maybe get paid a bit more or whatever, but actually, they're not your peers anymore. The ones who you would kind of, and then the new ones, like you work at Rolls-Royce, like, so do we all, right? So it'd be a good example of you'll use a mental shortcut which actually may give you the wrong answer. So how can you de-shroud it? And of course, that's one of the reasons why we think Glassdoor's really interesting. Because you don't just want to know in general, farmers are fine, whatever, or medical practice. You actually want to know what about a particular firm, right? It's the variance inside it too. All right, so what else do we know about drive these things? You're going to hear lots of other comments about this today. Well, one factor is, it's definitely not about money, one big factor we know is the boss. So for the guys, Danny Kahneman, who won Nobel Prize also actually before, Rich Thaler, did a lot of work on this and would use what's called the day reconstruction method. Actually, Nick might talk about it in terms of some of his work too, I don't know. But you ask people on a regular basis, literally your phone will go off and it will say, how happy are you right now? What are you doing, Amazing people do these surveys actually, so we know when people are having sex, they're pretty happy, it turns out, when they do these things. Oh my God, really? Anyway. But in this kind of data, by the way, this is across US data especially, when are statistically people most unhappy? Do you know what it is? There's a clue. When they're with their boss, which is remarkable actually. So we know from lots of sources that this is really true. There's a fantastic Canadian economist called John Helliwell who's done lots of work on well-being, and he's looked at the workplace. And one of the things he finds is that it's an old Gallup question, I think, where you ask people to rate, thinking of your immediate sort of superior or etc., how would you rate them on a scale of 1 to 10 of are they like your boss or are they like your partner? Remember that kind of question? Anyway, so if you work out what's the impact, not on your work satisfaction, on your life satisfaction of a 1-point movement on that 10-point scale, right? It's the equivalent of a 30% movement in your salary. It's a really big deal. Good advice in life, try and make sure your boss is not an arsehole. Are we allowed to say that? But it's really consequential, not just for your work satisfaction, your life satisfaction. Fortunately, I'm sure you're all fantastic bosses, so, that's all good to know. Other things that matter, you might, for example, want to know about progression opportunities. But an interesting question would be, I guess in general, if you were rationally trying to choose where to work, what would be the kind of things you would want to know about? What's the quality of the boss? A lot of things on Glassdoor, etc. Are there progression opportunities? What would be the most useful thing? And it wouldn't only be, of course, your pay. But as you said, historically, incredibly hard to find out. And at the risk of kind of repetition, I just want to drive home how consequential these sort of shrouded variables are. So if you can't see it, it doesn't affect your behavior, you use these shortcuts. So I don't know, it's a wonderful study on, there's a lot of interest around privacy and cyber and so on at the moment. And where you say to people, how important is privacy to you? Actually, when you look at people's behavior, it doesn't seem to be at all important until you ask them the question. And then it becomes important. Like, what? So a study, for example, of Carnegie Mellon students, where they're asked, hey, a really kind of cool, funky website, and then lots of very, very personal questions, like, which drugs have you done? Have you cheated on your exams? And blah, blah, blah. And students are really happy to answer these questions, it turns out. But when you redesign the website and you say, such and such, we guarantee that none of this data will be used by anyone else, we'll keep it secure, guess what happens? No one answers questions anymore. Actually, so because you don't think about it until you're prompted to think about it, see what I mean? So it's very consequential. So what do we do? So it's deshrouding markets. This is really profound. It can be really important. There are good examples out there. So when you go and buy your car for your 18-year-old, you want to know, not just its price or whatever, but you look at those star ratings, right? And so this has literally changed markets, we know. The SUV market was utterly changed by the fact that it got low NCAP ratings early on, right? And it changed what manufacturers did in a very dramatic way. Very simple ratings. Here's a good current one at the moment. If you've got your kid and you're going to get them their first smartphone, you might look at a rating like this. This is a rating actually done by 15-year-olds, teenagers, asking about the effects of different social media on their mood, etc. So it turns out YouTube, for example, it's not great for your sleep, but it doesn't make you feel crap, basically. Whereas there are some others, which we could talk about, which really make you feel pretty bad, particularly if you're a teenage girl, and so on and so on. So you think, well, actually, by putting this out there, this changes the nature of the game, right? It makes it, of course, this particular thing, like, I'll change our practice, Instagram, in order to have better outcomes. So it's what we call deshrouding. Is it true in other areas? So it's been very well studied. This fantastic work by a guy at Harvard called Mike Luca. He looked at, for example, ratings of restaurants. And again, just to dig in a tiny bit more detail, what difference does it make? Does it actually change the market dynamic? It does. So Mike did this fantastic stuff to work out what's the value to a company, a restaurant, of getting 1 extra star on a 5-star rating. It's a really neat method, which I won't try and explain, which is where it shows this true causal effect. But basically, it's worth 7% extra on your turnover in the year following as a restaurant to have 1 star extra. And also what's really neat about it is it disproportionately has an impact on smaller market players. Right? Because imagine you're in Washington, oh, should I go out and have a pizza? You know, if it's Pizza Hut, you kind of know what you're getting. There's a kind of cool little place on the corner. Well, now you're really influenced by this rating. So it has a fantastic aspect to market dynamics, and it stimulates the growth of your best performers, and particularly in new kind of up-and-coming companies. So this is true for lots of other areas you can imagine, and of course in Glassdoor too. So we really want to construct a world, I think really that in which good companies, in a deep sense, grow and get market share, and they get the best people. And if you go back to the Helliwell work, the logical implication of it, it's so valuable to have a good boss. It means that people really should, you know, go for it, or firms that don't have good bosses will have to pay a market premium in some other way for those employees, right? So we really want to make the world that way. We want to make markets actually work better. So a lot of behavioural science basically is you take the micro and you turn it into a kind of macro intervention. So just in final, I thought we'd push you guys a little bit, which is, I do think Glassdoor is fantastic and the engagement of companies in this area, but it's an interesting question whether we could go even further around this, so what could we do? And definitely interesting questions about whether we can, for example, I spend a lot of my time with government, although BIT, I should explain, I should have said at the beginning, but is a social purpose company co-owned by British government, so we're a bit weird. But, you know, if you're in DWP or whatever, we have all kinds of other data. So let's just take DWP. So literally millions of people flow through job centres every year. Why don't we just ask them, what would be the 3 best questions you'd like to know about firms? And say, I don't know, hey, how would you rate the boss? Right, or whatever, or are there progression opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. Like, how would we get more data flowing into Glassdoor? How would we fill out, particularly the middle of the distribution, where, you know, all those people who are like, oh, it's pretty good, but they didn't give you feedback. And it's so important, I think, is whether we can construct a world with APIs to get more data flowing in. So as I said, really, really good firms in that deep sense are able to expand and get market share. Right, so I'm going to kind of end there. Hopefully I'm about on time. I'm looking at my little caught up a bit for you. Hopefully at least slightly intrigued you about how your own brains work, about why this is important, and how we can kind of weave it in. And I do commend Glassdoor and the companies that have done well. I think it's really powerful, and as I said, the question is, could we make it even more so in a funny kind of way? Thank you.